We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. Aristotle. Most people believe that success depends on a brilliant moment, a unique opportunity, or an innate talent that ignites like a spark at the right time. But the reality, both harsher and more liberating, is that everything great is born from something small, everything extraordinary is built upon the ordinary, and every success story is made up of an unbroken chain of perseverance. What's fascinating is that most people never see it because they're too busy looking for shortcuts or waiting for the lucky break that never comes. Imagine a sculptor facing a block of marble. The impatient observer believes the statue appears the instant the last piece of stone breaks off. But the true artist knows that beauty lies not in that final moment, but in each repeated blow, day after day with the same routine. Blow after blow, almost invisible, until what seemed immutable begins to yield. The same is true in your life. Perseverance is the invisible chisel that shapes your goals, your relationships, your body, your mind, and even your destiny. Consistency is uncomfortable, quiet, and rarely celebrated. No one applauds you for reading 20 pages a day, for getting up 10 minutes earlier, for saving a small amount of money each week, for writing a few lines every day. But these actions, so discreet, are seeds that slowly germinate underground. When someone blossoms and surprises the world, others call them lucky or gifted, without understanding that what they are seeing is the accumulated result of hundreds of small, invisible victories. Think of Usain Bolt, considered the fastest man on the planet. Everyone remembers him for the sub-10-second sprints that made him famous. But few remember that behind those 10 seconds were thousands of hours of training, monotonous repetitions, early mornings on the track, and seemingly endless strength exercises. The glory in the stadium is just the tip of the iceberg. The invisible foundation is consistency, and without it there are no records, no gold medals, no legends. The same applies outside of sports. Thomas Edison needed more than 1,000 attempts to perfect the electric light bulb. Some might see that as 1,000 failures, but he called it 1,000 steps toward the right result. That way of thinking only comes from perseverance, training the mind not to give up even when progress is minimal or invisible. In the end, history remembers the invention, but what made it possible were the dark hours of silent repetition. Simple habits have a hidden power because they don't require extraordinary talent. Anyone can walk 10 minutes a day, drink more water, write down 3 ideas every morning, save a coin, or practice a skill for 15 minutes. What makes them powerful weapons is repetition, the discipline to maintain them even when they seem useless or too small to make a difference. That's where many fail. They underestimate the small things, give up too quickly, or can't tolerate the apparent slowness of the results. A real and relatable example can be seen in reading. A person who decides to read just 10 pages a day can finish 36 books in a year. 10 pages may seem like nothing, just a few minutes in the morning or evening. But repeat that habit for 5 years, and they will have read 180 books. That simple commitment will place them intellectually on a different level than those who only wait for free time to read. It wasn't talent, a stroke of inspiration, or luck. It was consistency applied to a simple habit. The same principle applies to the financial world. A person who saves $5 a day can accumulate more than $1,800 a year. In 10 years, without major sacrifices, they will have amassed more than $18,000, not counting any interest that might be generated if that money is invested. Most people dismiss such a small amount, but those who understand the power of habits know that it is repetition that transforms the insignificant into an impressive sum. Money doesn't grow because of the initial amount, but because of the consistent habit of setting it aside. Consistency is also the secret to relationships. A small, daily gesture of affection strengthens a marriage more than an expensive gift once a year. Listening to a child for a few minutes each day leaves a deeper impression than an occasional trip to make up for lost time. Human bonds are not built with grand gestures, but with simple habits repeated until they become part of one's identity. Why do simple habits beat talent and motivation? Because talent without consistency rusts, and motivation is volatile. We've all felt intense motivation after hearing a speech or reading an inspiring book. But after a few days that fire dies. Consistency, on the other hand, doesn't depend on emotion. It's cool, it's firm, it's like a river that never stops flowing. It may be slow, but its force erodes mountains. Simple habits don't require you to wake up every day with extraordinary energy. You don't need to wait for inspiration to drink a glass of water, take a short walk, or jot down a few lines in your notebook. Going to bed at the same time every night and improving your sleep doesn't take any special talent. The key isn't doing it perfectly, but doing it every day. That's the difference between those who achieve cumulative results and those who get stuck in the endless search for motivation. When you understand this, talent ceases to be your primary concern. It doesn't matter if you're not the smartest, the fastest, or the most creative. What matters is whether you can maintain a simple, sustained action over time until the results accumulate in your favor. The world bows to consistency because neither talent nor motivation can compete against it in the long run. But before we continue, please write in the comments which country you're listening to this audiobook from, and if this message resonates with you, please like and share this post. This way you'll ensure you don't miss any content that nourishes your mind and brings you closer each day to the life you truly deserve. There's no time to lose. Now let's continue. Chapter number 1. The Rule of Constancy. Success seems to be related to action. Successful people keep moving. They make mistakes, but they don't stop. Conrad Hilton. We live in an age that sells the idea of instant success. We see it on social media, in news headlines, on television programs. A young person becomes a millionaire with an app. A teenage athlete breaks a world record. A singer suddenly appears and conquers the world with a single song. These stories create the illusion that success is a matter of luck, innate talent, or a magical moment that changes life forever. But behind every apparent sudden success lie years of quiet work, sacrifice, and perseverance. The myth of instant success is just that, a myth designed to entertain those who prefer to believe in miracles rather than accept the price of discipline. True achievement stems from small, repeated actions, often so simple they seem insignificant. The difference between those who transform their lives and those who remain stagnant lies not in the intensity of what they do on a single day, but in their ability to do it every day. Anyone can go to the gym once and train hard, but real change comes from going every morning for months on end. Anyone can write 2 pages in a fit of inspiration, but a book is finished by the person who writes even when they don't feel like it. Anyone can save money when they receive an unexpected payment, but wealth is built by setting aside a fixed percentage of their salary each month. A clear example is music. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is considered a genius from childhood, but what few remember is that his father, Leopold Mozart, rigorously trained him daily from the age of 3. By the time Mozart wrote his first known compositions, he had already spent more than a decade practicing with discipline. It wasn't magic, it was perseverance. Even Albert Einstein, to whom pure genius is often attributed, tirelessly repeated thought experiments, dedicating hours and days to refining a single idea until he fully understood it. What the world admired as spontaneous genius was actually the result of years of methodical repetition. The root of success lies in understanding that every action leaves a mark. A drop of water doesn't break a stone in a day, but repeated enough times it erodes even the hardest material. The same is true for simple habits. Reading a little, studying a skill, training a muscle, meditating for a few minutes. On their own, they may seem insignificant, but accumulated they build an unstoppable force. This principle has no exceptions. Great entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, and leaders share a common quality beyond their talent: daily discipline. Let's take the case of Stephen King, one of the world's most prolific writers. King has published more than 60 novels and more than 200 short stories. His secret isn't a supernatural talent for writing, but a consistent habit. Every day he writes 2,000 words regardless of whether he's inspired or not. This daily commitment has allowed him to build a career that has lasted for decades. If an aspiring writer imitates this routine, after a year they would have more than 700,000 words written, enough for several books. The difference isn't inspiration, it's consistency. The same logic applies to sports. Michael Jordan, considered by many to be the greatest basketball player of all time, didn't define himself as the most talented, but as the hardest worker. He would stay after practice shooting hundreds of extra shots, perfecting his technique. His consistency in these details is what made him a legend. Tiger Woods practiced thousands of swings daily from childhood. Serena Williams spent hours perfecting every movement even after winning championships. Talent opens the door, but only daily discipline allows you to walk through it. The myth of instant success is also dangerous because it creates frustration in those who believe it. If someone thinks that success depends on luck or natural talent, they will give up at the first obstacle. They will tell themselves that they weren't born for it, that others have a special gift and they don't. But when someone understands that the key lies in repeated actions, their perspective changes completely. They stop obsessing over immediate results and focus on the process. Effort ceases to be a burden because it becomes part of their identity. A powerful and relatable example is education. Some students seem gifted because they get good grades without much effort, but in the long run, they aren't always the most outstanding. True academic success belongs to those who develop the habit of studying every day, even if it's just for half an hour. This consistency builds a foundation of knowledge that becomes unbeatable. The same is true with languages. Someone who studies for 10 minutes a day for 2 years will master a language better than someone who studies intensively for a month and then gives up. Consistency also transforms bodies and minds in everyday life. An overweight person might get discouraged if they don't see immediate results after a week of dieting or exercising. But if they walk 30 minutes a day for a year, they will have covered more than 1,000 kilometers. That distance is equivalent to walking from Lima to Bogota, step by step, without even realizing it. This accumulation of small daily steps generates health changes impossible to achieve with short-term, extreme diets. The same is true for the mind. An individual who dedicates 15 minutes a day to meditation can transform their level of calm, concentration, and emotional control in a matter of months. 15 minutes may seem insignificant, but after a year they will have invested more than 90 hours training their mind. This silent training will give them an immense advantage over those who never take the time to practice mindfulness. True stories of success always follow the same pattern. J.K. Rowling wrote the first Harry Potter book in cafes, with a young daughter by her side and under financial pressure. She could have given up, but she wrote a little each day. When it was finally published, the world thought it was an overnight success. In reality, it had been a battle of perseverance, of writing even when life seemed to be pushing her against it. The same is true for Walt Disney, who before creating his empire was rejected by several studios and lost his first company. What sustained him wasn't a stroke of luck, but the insistence on continuing to produce, on improving each project, on learning from every setback. The pattern is also repeated in the world of science. Marie Curie, a pioneer in the study of radioactivity, spent years working in precarious conditions, analyzing tons of pitchblende to extract just a few grams of radioactive material. Her perseverance in a tedious and slow process allowed her to discover elements that changed the history of science. Without discipline, that discovery would never have happened. These examples show us that daily discipline is not a luxury reserved for a select few, but a choice available to everyone. Each person has the power to decide on a simple action and repeat it. It's not about waiting for perfect inspiration or comparing yourself to those who seem to be progressing faster. It's about committing to a daily step, however small, however insignificant it may seem. The sum of those steps is what creates the path. The myth of instant success crumbles when we look at the history of great human achievements. Behind every genius are thousands of hours of practice. Behind every shooting star are years of effort that never made it onto television. What sustains true winners is not the spark of a moment, but the slow burn of perseverance. And that slow burn is within everyone's reach. It simply requires igniting it with a simple habit and nurturing it every day. Consistency isn't glamorous. No one will make a viral video of someone repeating the same routine over and over. But when those accumulated routines bear fruit, the whole world is amazed. They call it a miracle, they call it destiny, they call it luck. You'll know it wasn't any of those things. It was the quiet power of small, repeated actions. It was the invisible, daily discipline that created the visible. That's the true secret of the rule of consistency. Chapter number 2. The enemy within, the mind that seeks comfort. The greatest enemy of progress is not ignorance, but the illusion that we have already done enough. Daniel Kahneman. Within each person exists an invisible force that acts as a guardian, a sentinel protecting us from what it perceives as danger, discomfort, or unnecessary effort. That guardian is none other than our own mind, a mind that seeks comfort as if it were life's sole purpose. Our brain, shaped by millions of years of evolution, wasn't designed to make us happy or successful in the modern world. It was designed to keep us safe, to conserve energy, to avoid risks that in the past could have meant death. That primitive programming still governs many of our daily decisions, even though we no longer live in caves or flee from predators. When we face a new challenge such as learning a skill, starting a business, or exercising, the brain interprets it as a significant energy expenditure. And since its priority is conserving energy, it immediately looks for excuses to stop us. Thoughts like, do it tomorrow, it's not that important, you don't feel like it, or even, it's better to start when you have more time arise. These phrases seem reasonable, but they are actually disguises for fear and resistance. They don't stem from deep logic, but from a survival instinct that doesn't distinguish between running from a tiger and sitting down to write a book. Self-sabotage is the most sophisticated mechanism of this comfort-seeking mind. It doesn't always present itself as a harsh voice saying don't do it, but rather as an internal negotiation that seems friendly. When you decide to get up early to exercise, your brain says, 5 more minutes in bed won't hurt. When you resolve to eat healthily, it whispers, today is a special day, tomorrow you're back on the diet. When you plan to study, the temptation arises to check social media, just for a few seconds. The problem isn't a single decision, but the accumulation of thousands of small concessions that end up building a habit of surrendering to comfort. Procrastination is the most well-known face of this internal enemy. Putting tasks off isn't simply laziness, it's a defense mechanism. When something requires effort, the brain feels discomfort and pushes us to seek more gratifying activities in the short term. Checking emails, cleaning the desk, watching a video, answering messages, these are all distractions that make us feel busy without confronting the real task. The curious thing is that the more important the action we need to perform, the stronger the resistance. That's why the most valuable goals are often the ones we postpone the most. A clear example of this occurs with writers. Many confess that organizing the library, cleaning the house, or even washing the dishes become irresistible activities just when they have to sit down to write. It's not that these tasks are urgent, it's that the brain seeks to escape the discomfort of facing the blank page. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman admitted that many of his distractions arose when he had to concentrate on complex problems. The mind preferred to take refuge in secondary activities rather than endure the strain of true intellectual work. Recognizing internal resistance is the first step to overcoming it. We can't fight an enemy we can't see. When you understand that the voice urging you to procrastinate isn't you, but rather an ancestral programming trying to protect you, you stop identifying with it. You stop believing that your lack of motivation signifies incapacity, and you understand that it's simply your brain trying to conserve energy. This understanding shifts your perspective. It's no longer about waiting to feel motivated, but about acting despite the lack of motivation. An illustrative example is the story of David Goggins, a former Navy SEAL and ultra-endurance athlete. Goggins talks about the mind game that occurs every time the body feels pain. The mind starts making excuses. You've done enough. You're going to get injured. You don't need to keep going. But in reality, according to Goggins, when you think you can't go on, you've barely reached 40% of your capacity. What stops most people isn't the physical limit, but the mental limit created by that part of the brain that seeks comfort. This phenomenon is also observed in education. A student who begins reading a difficult book feels uncomfortable in the first few minutes. The brain protests because it doesn't understand everything immediately. Thoughts like, this book is too complicated, maybe I'm not smart enough, or, I'd better read something easier then arise. But if the person persists for a few more minutes, the mind adapts and begins to find patterns. The initial obstacle wasn't inability, but internal resistance. The comfort-seeking mind also uses fear as a tool. It convinces us that it's better not to try something new because we might fail. It reminds us of past mistakes, exaggerates the consequences of being wrong, and paints catastrophic scenarios that rarely occur. This exaggeration is an evolutionary mechanism. Our ancestors who took too many risks were less likely to survive. But in modern life, where making a mistake doesn't mean being eaten alive, this programming becomes an unnecessary obstacle. Examples abound. Many people don't start a business because they fear losing money, when in reality the loss would be less than the cost of not trying. Others don't speak in public for fear of ridicule, even though the worst that could happen is a single laugh. Some don't confess their feelings for fear of rejection, even though the most they would receive would be a no. The brain magnifies potential pain because it seeks to keep us safe, but this exaggeration becomes the prison that prevents us from moving forward. The most paradoxical thing is that the mind, in trying to protect us, ends up harming us. By avoiding physical exertion, it weakens the body. By dodging intellectual challenges, it stagnates the mind. By fleeing emotional risks, it impoverishes our relationships. The guardian meant to save us from external dangers becomes an internal jailer that limits our growth. True freedom lies not in eliminating that voice, but in recognizing it and deciding to act anyway. An inspiring example can be found in the story of Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and survivor of Nazi concentration camps. In extreme conditions, where comfort was non-existent, Frankl observed that those who found a purpose were able to withstand even the most brutal pain. The mind sought to surrender, but the will to meaning kept them going. Frankl understood that the ultimate freedom of human beings is the ability to choose their attitude in the face of any circumstance. That choice begins when we recognize our inner resistance and decide not to obey it blindly. Modern science supports this view. Studies on neuroplasticity show that every time we overcome resistance and take action, we strengthen brain circuits that facilitate consistency. It's like training a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. At first, getting up early is difficult, but after repeating it for weeks, the habit takes hold and resistance decreases. The brain learns that this action no longer poses a threat, and the initial discomfort fades away. Self-sabotage, procrastination, and inner resistance don't disappear completely, but they can be tamed. Every time we act despite the discomfort, we weaken the inner enemy. Every time we give in, we strengthen it. That's why it's vital to recognize its tricks and not be deceived. That voice that tells you, tomorrow will be better, isn't looking out for your progress. It's looking for your immediate comfort. That comfort, however tempting, comes at a very high price. Your unfulfilled goals, your postponed dreams, your wasted potential. The challenge is to accept that discomfort is not an enemy but a sign of growth. The muscle that aches after exercise is getting stronger. The mind that resists concentrating on a book is expanding its attention span. The emotion that trembles before public speaking is preparing to overcome fear. Discomfort is the threshold of progress, and crossing it is the only way to grow. In the end, the inner enemy doesn't disappear, but it can become an ally. When you hear that voice that urges you to stay in bed, to procrastinate, to give up, use it as a sign that you're on the right path. Resistance appears precisely where the greatest growth is happening. Recognizing it, accepting it, and acting anyway is the essence of discipline. And that discipline is what separates those who live dominated by comfort from those who conquer their own limits. Chapter number 3. Strategies for not giving up. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. This statement encapsulates a truth as powerful as it is simple. What defines us is not isolated moments of inspiration, nor those instants when we feel unstoppable, but the sum of all those days when we decide to keep going even when we don't want to. The true secret of great achievements lies not in fleeting bursts of motivation, but in the systems we design to compel ourselves to act even in the absence of enthusiasm. The reality is that no one, absolutely no one, feels motivated every day. Not Olympic athletes, not top business leaders, not even the artists we admire. They understand that motivation is an unstable emotional state and that relying solely on it is like building a house on sand. The wind of fatigue, the rain of excuses, or the scorching sun of distractions can knock it down at any moment. That's why the key is having a system that pushes us to get back up when motivation has faded. A clear example can be found in the life of Stephen King, the famous writer. Throughout his career, he has published more than 60 novels and hundreds of short stories. Many see him as a creative genius, someone touched by talent. However, when asked about his secret, his answer is simple. He writes every day without exception, even on his birthday or Christmas. He has an unbreakable ritual. Every morning he sits down at his typewriter and doesn't get up until he has written at least 2,000 words. He doesn't wait for inspiration, he doesn't negotiate with himself. He simply does it because his system leaves him no other choice. This is the power of rituals and micro-commitments. You don't need grand feats every day, simply design small actions that become automatic. Consider an amateur runner who wants to become a marathoner. At first, the idea of running 42 kilometers seems impossible, and the initial motivation soon fades in the face of fatigue. But if that runner commits simply to putting on their shoes and going outside every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes, over time they will create a system. That initial micro-commitment, so small that it's difficult to fail at, becomes the gateway to a larger habit. What matters is not the magnitude of the action, but the consistency with which it is performed. Another example comes from the world of music. Jerry Seinfeld, the American comedian, used a technique called "don't break the chain." On a calendar he marked with an X each day he wrote jokes. The goal wasn't to write the best joke or even a large number of them, but simply to maintain the chain of consecutive excess. This visual strategy becomes a system of positive pressure. Each day he kept his goal, the wall of excess grew, and missing it due to a single day of laziness became increasingly painful. It's a perfect example of how to create an environment where giving up becomes the most difficult option. The power of micro-commitments is also reflected in behavioral psychology. James Clear, in his famous work on habits, mentions that reducing friction is one of the best strategies for not giving up. If you want to play guitar, leave it out of its case and in a visible place. If you want to eat healthily, put cut fruit in the refrigerator within easy reach. If you want to read more, put a book on your nightstand. The trick is to make the desired action so easy to begin that it seems ridiculous not to. This conscious design of your environment is part of the system that compels you to continue. Imagine someone who wants to start working out at the gym. The initial enthusiasm lasts maybe a week or two. Then come the rainy days, the long work days, or emotional exhaustion. Without a system, they'll most likely give up. But if that person pays for a workout with a friend, or hires a coach they're accountable to, the equation changes. Social pressure becomes a tool that compensates for the lack of motivation. Here we see another strategy, creating external commitments that push you to keep going even when your internal willpower falters. The same thing happens in the academic world. Many students believe they need inspiration to sit down and study. The truth is, the most successful don't wait to feel ready. They always sit down at the same time in the same place with the same materials. They turn studying into a ritual that doesn't depend on fluctuating emotions. It's like turning on a machine. Simply opening the notebook and reading the first sentence of the topic is enough to put the brain into learning mode. These systems work because they leverage a fundamental truth of human psychology. We don't always control our emotions, but we can control our environment and our routines. By designing rituals and micro-commitments, we reduce our reliance on motivation and create an automatic pathway to action. Some people think that forcing yourself to act without motivation is a form of toxic self-imposed pressure. But the reality is different. Ultimately, what gives us satisfaction and self-confidence is fulfilling what we said we would do, not passively waiting to feel inspired. Every time you keep a small commitment to yourself, you reinforce your identity as a disciplined and capable person. Imagine someone who decides to read 10 pages of a book every day. After a month, they will have read 300 pages, the equivalent of a whole book. After a year, 12 books. And in a decade, more than 120 books. None of those daily readings are epic or memorable, but this system of micro-commitments produces a huge transformation in the long run. This is how great results are built, not in a burst of energy but in the sum of seemingly ordinary days. We mustn't forget that life itself is full of resistance. There will always be valid excuses, tiredness, responsibilities, unexpected events. That's why systems are like armor that protects us in those moments. If your rule is to write every day at 7 a.m., it doesn't matter if you slept poorly or if you don't feel like it. The system supports you. If your rule is to go for a walk after dinner, you do it even when you don't have the energy. And at the end of the week, those small, accumulated acts do more for you than any isolated burst of motivation. The real challenge isn't starting but not giving up. Anyone can begin a project with enthusiasm, but few see it through to the end. The difference between the two is that one depends on motivation while the other builds systems. The former collapses as soon as discomfort arises. The latter remains standing because it has invisible pillars supporting it. If you want to understand why some people achieve their goals and others don't, observe their daily rituals. Talent may impress, luck may help, but what truly determines the outcome are those silent systems that compel action even when no one is watching. Chapter number 4. The Secret of the Daily 1%. Cycling coach Dave Brailsford said that success is not achieved with one huge change, but with the accumulation of thousands of small improvements. This philosophy, known as the law of progressive improvement, is what took the British cycling team from being virtually irrelevant for decades to dominating the Olympic Games and the Tour de France. The idea was simple, yet revolutionary. If each day they could improve by just 1% in different areas, from the rider's position on the bike to the quality of sleep, nutrition, or even hand hygiene to avoid colds, over time those small improvements would accumulate into a monumental advantage. This principle is so powerful because it dismantles the myth of the giant leap. Many people believe that to change their lives they need a radical transformation, a heroic beginning, or almost superhuman discipline. The truth is that great changes don't come from spectacular decisions, but from tiny adjustments repeated every day. 1% a day may seem insignificant in the short term, almost invisible, but over time it becomes a tsunami of results. Let's think about the math behind this principle. If you improve by 1% every day for a year, the result isn't a 365% improvement, but 37 times more, thanks to the power of compound interest applied to behavior. Each small advance multiplies the previous one. Similarly, if you decline by 1% every day, after a year you'll have reduced your ability to almost zero. This cumulative effect explains why two people who seem similar today can be in completely opposite positions a decade from now. Let's take the example of reading. If someone decides to read just 10 pages a day, in a week they will have read 70 pages. In a month, around 300. In a year, more than 3,600 pages, which is equivalent to 12 complete books. None of those daily readings feels transformative, but the accumulated habit builds an internal library of knowledge that can forever change the way they think. Meanwhile, another person who says they don't have time to read and lets the days go by will find themselves in the same place, without any progress 10 years later. The same is true for health. Taking the stairs instead of the elevator might seem trivial, but when done daily for months, it burns hundreds of calories and significantly improves cardiovascular endurance. Reducing the amount of sugar in your coffee by 1 teaspoon a day might seem insignificant, but over the course of a year, that's pounds less sugar processed by your body. These small changes don't make headlines, but they quietly build a healthier future. The secret lies in understanding that daily discipline doesn't require epic feats, but rather sustained micro-habits. A micro-habit is so small it seems irrelevant, but its accumulation makes it a decisive factor. For example, writing 3 sentences in a journal every night won't make you a writer immediately, but over the years you'll have an invaluable record of your life and a clearer mind thanks to the habit of reflection. Practicing 5 minutes of meditation every morning won't turn you into a monk, but over time it transforms your level of calm and your ability to concentrate. An inspiring example is that of a young man who decided to start improving his fitness with a minimal commitment, going to the gym for 5 minutes a day. At first, it seemed ridiculous. He'd go in, lift a couple of weights, and leave. But the important thing wasn't the time, but the system. The goal was to make going to the gym as automatic as brushing his teeth. Over the months, those 5 minutes became 20, then an hour, and after a year, he had completely transformed his body and his health. All thanks to a daily 1%. Another example can be seen in the world of language learning. Many believe they need hours of intense study to master a foreign language. But those who truly achieve fluency are often those who commit to learning 5 or 10 new words every day. It seems like a small amount, almost irrelevant, but after a year they already know 3,000 words, enough to communicate fluently in most conversations. The key to the 1% lies in reducing resistance at the start. When a goal is too big, our minds become overwhelmed, and we look for excuses to postpone it. Conversely, when the action is so small it seems ridiculous, resistance disappears. Who doesn't have 5 minutes? Who can't read a page? Who can't take a small step? That's the psychological trick, making starting so easy that there's no reason not to. But it's not just about starting, it's about staying the course. Imagine a plane taking off from Los Angeles to New York. If its trajectory deviates by just a few degrees at the beginning, it will end up in a completely different city. That's how the 1% works. Every small daily adjustment radically changes the final destination. The person who decides to eat an apple instead of a cake, who dedicates 10 minutes to learning instead of wasting them on social media, who goes to bed half an hour earlier to get a better night's sleep, is quietly changing the course of their life. The great challenge of the 1% is that its benefits aren't immediate. We live in a society that glorifies the instant, the fast, the spectacular. We want visible results in weeks or even days. But microhabits don't work that way. They're like planting seeds. For weeks, maybe months, it seems like nothing is happening underground. But little by little, the invisible becomes visible, and one day, without even realizing it, we find ourselves surrounded by the fruits of our labor. To maintain faith in the daily 1% goal, we need to change how we measure progress. Instead of obsessing over immediate results, we must focus on the process. If your commitment is to read 10 pages, measure your success by the fact that you read them, not by how much you remember the next day. If your commitment is to walk for 15 minutes, measure your success by the fact that you went for the walk, not by the weight you lost in a week. When the process becomes your goal, the results inevitably follow. An important point is that the 1% isn't always linear. There will be days when it seems like you're going backward, moments of fatigue, periods of stagnation. But the accumulation of microhabits has an exponential effect. Like Japanese bamboo, which for years seems not to grow at all and then suddenly rises several meters in just a few weeks, that's how small improvements work. They work silently until one day they explode into visible results. If we analyze the lives of the most successful people, we discover that all of them, without exception, have applied the 1% daily rule. The musician who practices scales every day, the athlete who trains even a little on their worst day, the scientist who dedicates an hour to their research even if no one acknowledges it. None of them became great overnight. They all built their results on the accumulation of thousands of small actions. Even the daily 1% has an effect on our identity. Every time we practice a micro-habit, we reinforce our self-image. It's not just about what we achieve but about who we are becoming. A person who runs for 5 minutes a day begins to see themselves as active. A person who writes every morning begins to see themselves as a writer. Identity is built with small votes we give each day to the person we want to be. That's why the true power of the 1% lies not only in tangible results, but in the quiet transformation of our character. When we learn to value small, daily victories, we stop obsessing over big achievements and begin to enjoy the process. And paradoxically, that's when the big achievements arrive. Chapter number 5. Design your environment for success. Psychologist Kurt Lewin said that behavior is a function of the person and their environment. For a long time, we have believed that willpower is the ultimate weapon for achieving goals, but the reality is much simpler and, at the same time, more profound. It is not so much the amount of discipline we have, but the type of environment in which we live, that determines our results. Most of our daily decisions are not made consciously, but as an automatic response to the stimuli that surround us. Therefore, designing our environment is designing our future. Imagine someone who wants to eat healthier. If their kitchen is full of cookies, soda, and fried snacks within easy reach, they'll inevitably give in to temptation. Not because they lack willpower, but because they're battling an invisible enemy lurking in every corner of their home. On the other hand, if their refrigerator is stocked with fruits, vegetables, and fresh foods, they'll be much more likely to make the right choices. The environment acts as a silent trigger, tipping the scales without us even realizing it. The same applies to productivity. A person working with their phone on the desk, notifications constantly on, and social media just a click away, is constantly surrounded by distractions. Even with the best intentions of concentrating, their attention will be stolen time and again. In contrast, someone who leaves their phone in another room, turns off notifications, and organizes their desk with only the essentials will find it much easier to enter a state of deep focus. Here, it wasn't willpower that won, but the intelligent design of the environment. Great performers know this. Michael Phelps, the most successful Olympic swimmer in history, had a ritual that relied heavily on his environment. Before each competition, he would always play the same playlist and follow the same routine in the locker room. This not only prepared him mentally but also transformed his surroundings into a trigger for focus and confidence. He didn't need to depend on an unpredictable emotional state because his environment did the work for him. A common example is something as simple as leaving a book on the nightstand. Someone who has a book within reach before going to sleep is much more likely to read than someone who leaves their cell phone as their last companion. Our environment makes decisions for us. It's no coincidence that fast food companies place their most profitable products at eye level or that supermarkets put candy near the checkout. They understand that the environment shapes our decisions more than any internal force. Designing an environment for success involves surrounding ourselves with positive triggers. These are visual or contextual cues that remind us of what we want to achieve and motivate us to take action. If you want to exercise more, lay out your sneakers by your bed. If you want to drink more water, place a bottle on your desk. If you want to write, open your notebook and leave a pen on it before going to sleep. These small reminders remove initial resistance and make the desired action feel more natural. Neuroscience has shown that much of our behavior is based on associations. Seeing an object or being in a particular place automatically triggers a response in the brain. That's why many people can only concentrate in the library and not at home, because their minds have associated that environment with intellectual work. Understanding this gives us a powerful tool. We can train our brains by creating positive associations with certain spaces or times. For example, deciding that your desk is only for working, your bed is only for sleeping, and the sofa is only for relaxing. This mental clarity prevents confusion and strengthens discipline. But designing your environment isn't just about adding the positive. It's also about eliminating the negative. The most dangerous temptation is the one that's always present and in plain sight. A phone on the table is a constant reminder of messages, social media, and distractions. A television playing in the background steals your attention, even if you're not watching it. An uncomfortable chair invites you to abandon your task. That's why part of the job is making what you want to avoid invisible. If you don't want to eat junk food, don't buy it. If you don't want to waste time on social media, delete the apps from your phone. If you don't want to be distracted, organize your workspace so that only the necessary tools remain. A striking example is that of a graduate student who decided to write his thesis on a computer without an internet connection. He bought an old, used laptop, deleted unnecessary programs, and kept only a word processor. That simple decision eliminated hours of procrastination. He didn't need any further discipline because his environment eliminated the temptation at its root. The same logic applies to financial habits. Someone who wants to save can automate the transfer of a portion of their salary to a separate account as soon as they receive payment. Instead of fighting the temptation to spend, they redesign their financial environment so that saving happens without relying on daily decisions. Successful investors do the same. They eliminate the temptation to make impulsive decisions and establish automated systems. In the social sphere, our environment also includes the people we surround ourselves with. It's been shown that we tend to imitate the habits of those around us. If your friends smoke, you're more likely to smoke. If they exercise, you're more likely to do so too. If they value reading, you'll end up reading more. Designing an environment for success isn't just about reorganizing your physical space, but also about consciously choosing your social circles. It's not about abandoning valuable relationships, but about exposing yourself more to those who inspire you and less to those who hold you back. The writer and entrepreneur Jim Rohn summed it up succinctly: you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And it's not just a metaphor. Our identity and habits are silently contagious. If you want to build discipline, surround yourself with disciplined people. If you want to grow, seek out conversations with those who think bigger than you. Your human environment is as powerful a catalyst for change as your physical environment. An example of this can be found in support groups and learning communities. Someone who wants to quit drinking finds it much easier to do so in a group where everyone shares the same goal and encourages each other. A writer who wants to finish their novel achieves it more quickly if they belong to a circle where others are also writing and pushing each other. The social environment reinforces what individual willpower cannot sustain alone. In conclusion, designing your environment for success is like laying tracks for a train. No matter how powerful the locomotive is, if the tracks aren't aligned, it will derail sooner or later. Similarly, your willpower might propel you forward for a few days, but if your environment is filled with distractions and temptations, you'll eventually fall. On the other hand, if you align your environment with your goals, your path becomes inevitable. You don't need to be a disciplined hero, you just need to create the conditions that make success feel natural. The real secret isn't constantly resisting temptation, but preventing it from arising in the first place. It's not relying on motivation, but on positive reminders that activate your desired habits. It's not fighting your environment, but shaping it to work in your favor. When your surroundings are intelligently designed, your life transforms effortlessly, because each day becomes a silent ally, nudging you in the right direction. Chapter number 6. Reprogram your mind for consistency. An old Japanese proverb says, "Fall 7 times, get up 8. This simple phrase encapsulates the essence of perseverance. It's not about never failing, but about not staying down when you stumble. A person's true strength isn't measured by the amount of motivation they feel at any given moment, but by their ability to get up again and again, until sustained action becomes a natural part of who they are. Reprogramming the mind for perseverance means letting go of dependence on that initial spark of enthusiasm and learning to build an identity that functions even in the absence of inspiration. When we talk about automatic discipline, many believe it involves an inhuman, almost robotic effort, but the reality is quite different. It's about transforming conscious effort into something unconscious, so that it becomes as natural as breathing. At first, every change seems forced. Waking up early, exercising, studying an extra hour, saving instead of spending. However, as it's repeated, the brain begins to recognize that pattern as a preferred route. The initial effort shapes the neural connections until action becomes an easier path to follow than inaction. This happens because the human mind is plastic. Neuroscientists have shown that our habits are stored in the basal ganglia, a brain region that manages automatic routines. Every time we repeat an action, we reinforce that pattern, as if we were carving a path through a forest. At first, the undergrowth is dense and it's difficult to clear a path, but after several passes, the trail is marked and walking becomes second nature. Motivation belongs to the conscious and emotional realm. Discipline, on the other hand, settles deep within the brain until it becomes second nature. The difference between those who sustain their goals and those who abandon them lies in their fundamental beliefs. A person who believes they only act when they feel like it will never make consistent progress, because motivation is fleeting. On the other hand, someone who decides that, "I am someone who keeps their word," begins to act from a place of identity. This mental transformation is powerful. You no longer exercise because you're motivated, you do it because you're a disciplined person. You no longer study because you feel inspired, you do it because your identity is that of someone who grows every day. Changing your beliefs about who you are automatically changes your behavior. A revealing example can be found in the story of a writer who for years considered himself undisciplined. Every year he would promise to write a book, but he would give up by the 3rd week. Until one day he decided to stop defining himself as lazy and began to repeat to himself, "I am a writer and writers write every day." That simple phrase, repeated over and over, transformed his perception. He went from depending on bursts of inspiration to sitting down every morning, regardless of his mood. Over time, his brain no longer needed convincing. Writing had become his natural state. Reprogramming the mind also means understanding that effort ceases to feel like a sacrifice when it's linked to one's identity. Elite athletes don't ask themselves each morning if they feel like training. They simply train because for them, training is who they are. A pianist doesn't need daily motivation to practice. They do it because music is part of their being. When we manage to anchor our habits to our deepest identity, the internal friction that often leads us to procrastinate disappears. Another powerful tool for this reprogramming is the use of affirmations and conscious visualizations. Every time you reinforce who you are with words, your brain accepts that narrative and adjusts your actions accordingly. Saying, "I am a person who keeps their commitments," isn't an empty trick. It's planting an idea that, when repeated, becomes practical truth. Similarly, visualizing yourself acting with discipline and consistency trains your brain almost as if you had already lived that experience. Studies show that the mind doesn't entirely distinguish between what is imagined in detail and what is actually experienced. Both leave a mark on the brain. But consistency is also reinforced by internal rewards. Every time you perform an action that strengthens your disciplined identity, your brain releases dopamine, the pleasure hormone. This is the same substance released when you receive a like on social media or eat a sweet treat. The difference is that, in this case, the dopamine is associated with a constructive habit. Over time, your mind begins to seek that natural gratification in fulfilling your routine, and what once seemed like a sacrifice now feels like a source of satisfaction. It's also important to understand that automatic discipline doesn't mean absolute rigidity. The path to consistency requires intelligent flexibility. There will be days when circumstances change, when you can't stick to the entire routine. Reprogramming your mind isn't about punishing yourself for failure, but about maintaining continuity in some way. If you can't train for an hour, do 10 minutes. If you can't read 20 pages, read 2. The brain receives the message that the core identity remains, even if the format is adjusted. This avoids the all-or-nothing effect that often destroys entire processes with a small slip-up. Beliefs that foster consistency often share a common principle, that the process is more important than the immediate result. Those obsessed with quick results tend to give up when they don't see them. In contrast, those who understand that each day of discipline builds a solid foundation persevere, even without visible evidence. This farmer's mindset, sowing without expecting a harvest tomorrow, is what guarantees long-term commitment. Reprogramming your mind for consistency also involves surrounding yourself with symbols that reinforce that identity. A notebook where you record each day completed, a calendar where you mark your progress, a reminder in your workspace with phrases that define who you are. All of this acts as a mirror of the identity you wish to solidify. Each external element serves as an internal signal that reminds your brain that you no longer depend on fleeting motivation, but rather act from your true self. Ultimately, true transformation occurs when effort ceases to feel like an obligation and becomes a natural expression of your character. Reaching that point requires patience and practice, but once achieved, discipline is non-negotiable. It becomes an inseparable part of who you are. It is then understood that perseverance is not a momentary act of will, but rather the reflection of a mind reprogrammed to sustain what truly matters. Chapter number 7. Overcoming difficult times. There's an inevitable moment on every path of growth, the stumble. No matter how disciplined you are, sooner or later there will be a day when you sleep in, break your diet, miss a workout, or give in to distractions. Many believe that this moment marks the end of their effort, but in reality, it's the true beginning of perseverance. Greatness isn't measured by the absence of failures, but by the ability to recover from them quickly and without losing your way. Each fall can become an excuse to quit or a springboard to stronger discipline. When someone falls short in their routine, the first thing that usually arises is guilt. This emotional burden can be more destructive than the failure itself. A sleepless night won't ruin your health, but the belief that all is lost and that it's not worth trying anymore certainly can. That's why the first step to overcoming difficult times is learning to look at the mistake objectively. A bad day doesn't define your identity, it only represents a temporary interruption. You are not your failures, you are your ability to get back on track. A revealing example is that of professional musicians. When they rehearse a piece and hit a wrong note, they don't stop the entire performance or berate themselves for the mistake. They keep going, try again, and gradually correct the error. They understand that making mistakes is part of learning. Similarly, those who cultivate consistency must accept that interruptions are part of the process, and that the important thing is not to avoid them completely, but to train themselves to always return to the center. This is where a fundamental strategy comes into play: the never twice in a row rule. It consists of allowing yourself one slip-up, but committing to not letting it happen twice in a row. If you missed your workout one day, make sure you get back on track the next. If you ate erratically one day, make sure your next meal is healthy. This simple principle prevents a slip-up from becoming a destructive habit. It's not the isolated failure that brings you down, but the accumulation of uncorrected mistakes. Another powerful tactic for overcoming tough times is the so-called mini-emergency routine. This involves creating a scaled-down version of your habit that you can stick to even on your worst days. For example, if you don't have the energy for an hour of studying, commit to 10 minutes. If you can't run 5 kilometers, walk around your house for 10 minutes. The key is to maintain a connection to your identity. Your brain understands that, even with low energy, you're still a consistent person. This prevents the setback from turning into giving up. Turning setbacks into lessons and strength also requires a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, view them as valuable information. Ask yourself, what led me to fail? Was it fatigue, poor planning, overconfidence? Every setback holds a message that, if interpreted correctly, strengthens your future discipline. The entrepreneur who loses money on a project and learns to manage their resources better becomes wiser. The student who fails an exam and discovers they need a different study method gains a more effective strategy. Failure is not the enemy of success. It is the teacher of success. A crucial aspect is learning to regulate emotions during setbacks. Frustration and anger often cloud our ability to get back on track. Taking deep breaths, practicing a few minutes of silence, or writing in a journal can help you release the emotional burden and regain clarity. Those who manage to calm their minds after a mistake recover control faster than those who are consumed by self-criticism. Another inspiring example can be found in the story of Thomas Edison. It is said that before inventing the working light bulb, he failed more than 1,000 times. When asked how he endured so many failures, he replied, "I didn't fail 1,000 times, I discovered 1,000 ways that didn't work." This mindset is what transforms setbacks into stepping stones. If each mistake brings you closer to understanding what not to repeat, then each stumble is an essential part of success. It's also helpful to remember that consistency isn't a straight upward line, but a curve full of ups and downs. Accepting this reality prevents unrealistic expectations. There will be bright weeks and there will be gray days, but what matters is the overall direction. Like a long hike, not every step will be firm nor every stretch flat. However, as long as you stay the course, you'll reach your destination. A practical technique is to keep track of relapses and recoveries. Not to punish yourself, but to observe patterns. You might discover that you always slip up on the most stressful days at work or after nights of poor sleep. This information allows you to design preventative strategies. Sleep better, plan breaks, organize your tasks more intelligently. Identifying the root causes of your relapses gives you power over them. Resilience, understood as the ability to recover, is strengthened each time you get back on track after a setback. Someone who has never fallen doesn't know how strong they are. On the other hand, someone who stumbles and gets back up learns to trust in their resilience. That's why, each time you resume your discipline after failing, you not only maintain the habit, but you also strengthen your character. Ultimately, overcoming difficult times means accepting that perfection doesn't exist, but perseverance does. Consistency doesn't demand absolute purity, but rather a commitment to returning. Someone who gets up 100 times after falling is more valuable than someone who never takes risks for fear of making mistakes. Every fall is an opportunity to prove to yourself that your discipline doesn't depend on a perfect schedule, but on a profound decision to keep moving forward no matter what. Chapter number 8. Key habits for holistic success. They say success isn't built on grand stages, but in the intimacy of everyday life, in those repeated gestures that seem small, but which, accumulated with discipline, end up shaping an entire life. If we observe people who have achieved outstanding results in different areas, we'll notice a common pattern. They've all developed a set of key habits that act as invisible pillars of their success. It's not just about working hard, but about working consistently in physical, mental, emotional, financial, and professional dimensions, so that each one feeds off the others to form a virtuous cycle. Physical habits are often the most obvious because the body is the vehicle that supports everything else. A person with energy and vitality is more likely to persevere in any goal. Getting enough sleep, eating a balanced diet, and maintaining an exercise routine are not modern luxuries, but rather fundamental to human performance. The businessperson who sleeps 4 hours a day believing that this will make them more productive will, sooner or later, collapse from exhaustion. On the other hand, the one who prioritizes their rest ensures mental clarity and physical stamina to make high-level decisions. A clear example can be found in the lives of professional athletes, who understand that their bodies are their most valuable resource. But it's not just them. Writers, scientists, and business leaders also prioritize movement and health. Charles Darwin, for example, used to go for a walk every day at the same time. This physical habit not only kept him healthy but also helped him organize his thoughts and clarify his thinking. Consistency in taking care of one's body is not a luxury but a requirement for sustaining intellectual and emotional work in the long term. Alongside physical habits, we find mental habits, which allow us to channel our energy toward what truly matters. The mind is like a river. If it flows chaotically, it sweeps everything in its path. If channeled with focus, it can power turbines and generate extraordinary results. One of the most powerful habits in this area is the daily practice of mindful concentration. This can be expressed through techniques such as meditation, reflective writing, or the practice of eliminating distractions during periods of deep work. Mental clarity is also strengthened through planning. Successful people don't leave their day to chance. They intentionally design their hours, tasks, and priorities. Benjamin Franklin had a daily organizational ritual in which he would ask himself each morning, "What good can I do today?" That simple question, repeated with discipline, kept him focused on what was essential and helped him avoid distractions. The habit of focusing on what is important, not what is urgent, transforms the course of an entire life. But a strong body and a clear mind aren't enough. Cultivating emotional habits is also essential. This is where many fail because they believe success depends solely on knowledge or action, when in reality it also depends on the ability to manage inner turmoil. Resilience is one of the most powerful emotional habits. It means bouncing back after adversity, learning not to be crushed by the first difficulty. And it doesn't arise spontaneously, but rather from training the mind and heart to respond calmly under pressure. Internal control of emotions doesn't mean suppressing what we feel, but rather directing it. A person who gets into the habit of taking a deep breath before reacting, who practices gratitude amidst chaos, or who trains to see the positive even in setbacks, develops unbreakable inner strength. Consider historical leaders like Nelson Mandela, who cultivated patience and a positive outlook while in prison. His ability to remain calm and hopeful wasn't an accident, but an emotional discipline honed day after day. Among emotional habits, we also find the importance of relationships. Surrounding ourselves with people who uplift us rather than drag us down is a conscious choice that impacts our emotional stability. The habit of listening with empathy, communicating with respect, and building strong bonds is as vital as any other physical or mental practice. An emotional support network becomes a driving force for perseverance when our own motivation falters. Finally, we come to financial and professional habits, those that sustain material stability and allow everything else to flourish. Many dream of financial freedom, but few understand that it stems from small, consistent daily actions. Saving a percentage of each income, avoiding impulsive spending, investing with discipline, and continuously learning. The habit of consistency in finances is what makes the difference between those who achieve independence and those who live trapped in cycles of debt. An inspiring example is Warren Buffett, who began investing as a teenager and maintained the habit of saving and investing patiently for decades. His success wasn't due to a brilliant overnight move, but to the discipline of repeating the same pattern year after year. The same is true in the professional sphere. Great results don't come from a stroke of luck, but from the consistency of improving a little each day, fulfilling commitments, learning new skills, and delivering quality even when no one is watching. Professional consistency also means protecting your reputation. Successful people understand that every action builds or destroys trust. Keeping your word, being punctual, delivering on promises, and actively listening. These simple habits generate social capital that opens doors over time. It's not talent that matters most in the workplace, but the discipline of being reliable and consistently delivering results. All these habits, physical, mental, emotional, financial, and professional, don't work in isolation but rather together. A weak body affects the mind, a scattered mind sabotages emotions, unstable emotions damage finances, and disorganized finances generate stress that makes the body sick. Therefore, true holistic success arises from cultivating each of these areas with discipline and in a balanced way. The good news is that it's not about making huge, radical changes overnight. Just like the 1% a day principle, small, sustained adjustments are enough. Sleeping an extra half hour, reading for 10 minutes a day, writing down 3 things you're grateful for, saving 5% of your income, always delivering your work a little better than expected. Each of these gestures may seem insignificant, but when repeated consistently, they transform an entire life. Imagine a ladder where each rung represents a habit. It's not about rushing to the top, but about making sure you place a firm foot on each step. In this way, step by step, your body grows stronger, your mind becomes clearer, your emotions stabilize, your finances are put in order, and your career flourishes. Holistic success isn't a sudden destination, but the inevitable result of practicing the right habits every day. A person's true wealth isn't measured solely by money, titles, or external achievements, but by the quality of their internal habits. Because what you repeat defines you. And when you consistently cultivate key habits, your entire life becomes a testament to what true success means: balance, fulfillment, and purpose sustained over time. Chapter number 9. The power of the long term. Most people abandon their goals not because they lack talent, nor because opportunities are denied them, but because they lack the patience to wait for the long-term rewards. We live in a culture obsessed with instant gratification. The 7-day diet, the crash course that promises mastery of a language in a month, the business that supposedly will generate profits in weeks. However, the reality is that everything truly valuable requires time, care, and consistency. The tree that provides shade for generations began as a tiny seed that needed years of silent growth. The same is true for our lives. Great results are invisible at first, but inevitable when discipline is maintained long enough. The reason so many give up is that they confuse a lack of immediate results with a lack of progress. A student learning a new language might spend months without feeling fluent, until one day they discover they understand entire conversations. An entrepreneur starting a project might not see income for the first few years, but every contact, every mistake, and every accumulated improvement builds the foundation for their future success. The problem isn't the lack of progress, but the inability to see it in the short term. Discipline requires faith. Faith that what you do today, even if it doesn't bear fruit tomorrow, is silently building a solid future. This is where the power of compounding comes into play. Just like with money in an investment account, small, repeated actions generate exponential results over time. Reading 10 pages a day might not seem like much, but in a year it adds up to more than 3,600 pages, the equivalent of a dozen books. Saving a percentage of your income might seem slow at first, but after a decade it creates a fund that gives you freedom and peace of mind. Exercising for 20 minutes a day might not show visible changes in a week, but over time it transforms your health, posture, energy levels, and even how you approach challenges. The compounding effect also works in negative ways. Skipping your exercise routine, consistently overspending, or postponing important decisions might not seem serious on a single day, but repeated over years, they destroy your health, finances, and opportunities. Consistency works like accrued interest. It multiplies what you do well and also what you neglect. Understanding this is vital for consciously choosing which habits you want to cultivate, because sooner or later you will reap what you repeat. To sustain yourself in the long term, it's essential to learn to visualize. This isn't about dreaming of unrealistic fantasies, but about clearly projecting what your life would be like after 5, 10, or 20 years of discipline. Imagine someone who starts today by investing 30 minutes a day in learning a new skill. In 5 years, they would have over 900 hours of practice, enough to stand out from the crowd. In 10 years, that skill could become their main profession. In 20, they would be a recognized master in their field. It all began with a small habit, repeated patiently. Visualizing the long term also helps maintain motivation when immediate results don't appear. A runner training for a marathon doesn't focus on each isolated kilometer, but on the goal of crossing the finish line. Similarly, someone who visualizes their life 10 years from now can better tolerate the discomfort of the present, because they understand that each effort is a brick laid in a much larger structure. A historical example can be found in the construction of medieval cathedrals. The architects and artisans who laid the first stones knew they would never see the work completed in their lifetime. Even so, they worked with precision and perseverance because they understood that their work had meaning within a project that transcended their time. This long-term vision gave them the strength to sustain the effort day after day. The same is true in our lives. When your horizon is not limited to the immediate present, but extends to decades of perseverance, every action takes on profound significance. One of the greatest gifts of the long term is that it transforms discipline into character. At first, you need reminders and external motivation. Over time, consistent practice defines you. The disciplined student becomes a reliable professional, the persistent entrepreneur a respected leader, the person who takes care of their health for years a beacon of vitality. Consistency ceases to be something you do and becomes who you are. Of course, the long-term path is not without its challenges. There will be moments of doubt, temptations to give up, and external voices insisting that it's not worth the wait. But each day of discipline is a silent declaration of trust in yourself and the process. When you resist the temptation of instant gratification, you are training your mind to see beyond quick rewards and cultivate the wisdom of someone who understands that what is truly valuable takes time. The power of the long term is also revealed in inevitable comparisons. At the beginning, the difference between someone who strives and someone who doesn't may be almost invisible. But after 5, 10, or 20 years, the gap becomes abysmal. Two people who start from the same point can end up in radically different places simply because of the consistency of their daily choices. The first may enjoy success, health, and stability. The second, frustration and regret. Life doesn't change overnight. It changes over time, silently, shaped by what we repeat. Ultimately, consistency isn't just a means to achieve goals. It's a philosophy of life that connects you with the value of time. Understanding the power of the long term means recognizing that every action, no matter how small, is an investment in your future. It's living with the certainty that even if immediate results aren't always visible, each day of discipline is writing your life story. And when that story is viewed in perspective, it will be clear that patience, faith in the process, and unwavering perseverance were the keys that transformed small habits into great results. Chapter number 10. Force yourself to move on, the final method. There's a quote from Muhammad Ali that sums up the essence of perseverance. "I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion." That's the key, not letting comfort, fatigue, or doubt dictate your decisions. At this point, we already understand that great results don't come from bursts of motivation, but from daily persistence. But there's a deeper level, forcing yourself to keep going even when everything inside you screams for you to stop. And this isn't a negative obligation like a punishment, but a positive self-imposed demand, a commitment to your best self, a pact you make with yourself that you're not willing to break under any circumstances. The first principle of this final method is simple. Never negotiate with the inner voice that makes excuses. That voice always appears disguised as logic. It tells you that you deserve to rest because you worked hard yesterday, that it's better to leave it for tomorrow because you're tired today, that it's okay to break the chain just once. But that voice is a professional liar. It's the one that has sabotaged millions of talented people who never achieved anything because they couldn't resist its siren song. What can you do about it? The answer is clear. Decide beforehand that you won't engage in dialogue with that voice. When it arrives, cut it off with action. It's like someone who turns off their alarm clock without thinking. They don't analyze, they don't debate, they don't negotiate. They just get up. That's the first rule. Immediate action, no internal negotiations. The second principle of this method is learning to make consistency your identity. You're no longer someone who tries to read every day. You are a reader. You're no longer someone who tries to train. You're an athlete in training. You're no longer someone who tries to save money. You're a financially disciplined person. When you identify with what you do, the action ceases to depend on motivation and becomes a part of you. If you tell yourself, "I am consistent," you force yourself to live up to that standard because breaking it would be a betrayal of yourself. Think of a doctor. Even if they're tired, even if they don't feel like it, they know their role is to save lives. They can't tell a patient to see them tomorrow because they don't feel motivated today. Their identity compels them. That's how you should operate with your habits. The third principle is to design a system of external accountability that doesn't allow you to back down. By nature, we are more responsible to others than to ourselves. If someone tells you to train at 7 a.m., you'll probably show up, if only to avoid looking bad. But if it's just you, it's easier to postpone. That's why a system of external accountability can make all the difference. Make a public commitment, share your progress with someone, create a symbolic contract that obligates you to comply, or establish consequences. For example, if you don't stick to your writing routine, you donate money to a cause you don't support. If you miss your workout, you have to do an unpleasant task. It's not about punishing yourself, but about using your psychology to your advantage. At first, it might seem rigid, but you'll soon discover that this external pressure becomes an ally. The combination of these three rules creates a shield against inconsistency. No internal negotiations, an identity tied to consistency, and external systems that reinforce your discipline. It's an ironclad circle that leaves no room for doubt or laziness. And here's something powerful. The more you practice it, the less you'll depend on external systems and the more your identity will suffice. There will come a point when consistency will be as natural as brushing your teeth or drinking water. You don't need to think about it, You simply do it. Let's consider some concrete examples. Imagine a university student who dreams of graduating with honors. Most of his classmates only study when exams are approaching, relying on last-minute adrenaline. He, on the other hand, decides to apply a methodical approach. He never compromises with the voice that tells him to stop reviewing. Every day, even if it's just for 30 minutes, he opens his notes. He doesn't see himself as someone who studies a lot, but as someone disciplined, an exemplary student. Furthermore, he shares his goal with his group of friends and asks them to hold him accountable every week. 2 years later, while many of his classmates lament not having made the most of their time, he already has a scholarship secured to continue his postgraduate studies. What set him apart? It wasn't intelligence, it was his method. Another example, a person who decides to transform their health. They're tired of failing with diets and gyms. This time they decide things will be different. Instead of waiting for motivation, they force themselves to accomplish small actions every day. They don't argue with themselves about whether they feel like it or not. They simply put on their sneakers and go for a walk. They repeat the action so often that it stops being an attempt and becomes their identity. They no longer say, "I'm exercising," they say, "I'm an active person." And to avoid backsliding, they join a group where their peers meet 3 times a week. After a year, they've lost weight, gained energy, and transformed their self-image. It all started with a decision not to give in to that inner voice. But perhaps the most revealing example is that of those who, without being the most talented, outperform those who seem destined for success. The great musicians, writers, entrepreneurs, or athletes who persevered when others gave up. An average writer who dedicates 1 hour a day for 10 years will end up with more than 3,000 hours of writing, enough to produce several publishable works. Meanwhile, someone with extraordinary talent who writes only when inspired will never get beyond a few incomplete drafts. Time rewards those who force themselves to persevere. This method also has a profound emotional component. Learning to be comfortable with discomfort. Life will always bring moments when you'd rather rest, be entertained, or escape. But if your philosophy is consistency over motivation, you decide that your worth isn't measured by how you feel in the moment, but by what you do despite it. Tiredness, boredom, or lack of motivation cease to be obstacles and become part of the process. Like a mountain climber who, even though every step hurts, keeps climbing because they know the summit awaits. Ultimately, this method isn't a set of external rules, it's a way of life. It's about accepting that big dreams aren't achieved through fleeting motivation, but through relentless perseverance. It's about choosing to be your own coach, your own judge, your own ally. It's about understanding that no one will come to save you or force you, that you're the one who must sign the most important contract, the one you make with yourself. And when you truly sign it, there are no excuses, no days off, no giving up. There's only action, repeated again and again, until the world has no choice but to acknowledge your effort. Consistency is the best investment you can make in your life, because every day you persevere, however insignificant it may seem, adds to a capital that sooner or later will yield immense rewards. The secret lies in forcing yourself to keep going, not as a tormentor but as a leader of yourself. Because in the end, those who triumph are not the most intelligent or the luckiest, but those who never stopped walking when others did. And that is the philosophy that can transform your destiny, consistency before motivation. Epilogue. True success is invisible at first. There's an uncomfortable truth that most people avoid accepting. What truly transforms your life won't be immediately visible. Great results never appear in the first few days, sometimes not even in the first few months. They're invisible because they develop silently, like a seed hidden underground before it sprouts. During that time, it may seem like nothing is happening, that your effort isn't worthwhile, that your sacrifices are unrewarded. This is where most people give up, just when the root is growing strongest. True success is invisible at first because it's built on the repetitions no one sees. When you write one more page even if no one reads it. When you go for a run at dawn while the city still sleeps. When you study while others rest. When you save small amounts that seem insignificant. Each of these acts silently accumulates and, over time, becomes a legacy. But that legacy isn't forged by what you attempt occasionally, but by what you repeat every day even when no one applauds you. Imagine a craftsman working with wood. Day after day he polishes, sands, and adjusts without anyone noticing. For weeks the object looks like a shapeless piece. But one day suddenly the result appears. A perfect sculpture that seems to have sprung from nothing. The same is true for your life. The world will only see the finished sculpture, not the hours of solitary effort, not the moments of doubt, not the times you thought about giving up. That's why you should never measure your progress by what others recognize, but by your ability to remain true to the process, even if the results are slow in coming. The legacy you leave behind won't be a consequence of isolated grand attempts, but rather of what you were able to sustain. The marathon runner isn't the person who one day decided to sign up, but the one who trained silently for months. The musician who performs before thousands isn't the product of a single intense practice session, but of years of daily discipline. And the same is true in every area of your life: relationships, health, finances, personal projects. You are not what you occasionally attempt. You are what you repeat until it becomes inseparable from your identity. If you want to leave a legacy, think about what you want people to say about you when you're gone. No one will remember the projects you started and abandoned. No one will count the times you said, "Someday I'll do it." What will remain is what you repeated until the very end. Perhaps it's the values you instilled in your family, perhaps the company you built, perhaps the example of discipline you set with your life. Whatever it is, it won't be formed in an instant, but through daily perseverance. And here's the key point: you don't need to wait for the perfect moment to begin. You don't need motivation to strike, circumstances to change, or everything to align perfectly. Today, with what you have, you can start. Today you can write the first page, take the first step, make the first decision. Don't underestimate that beginning because it seems small. The secret to great achievements lies not in a glorious start, but in the ability to sustain the ordinary for years until it becomes extraordinary. Most people procrastinate because they believe tomorrow will be better. But the reality is that tomorrow doesn't exist. There's only an eternal today that repeats itself. Every time you choose to put things off, you're training your mind for inaction. Conversely, every time you choose to act now, you're training your character for greatness. Ask yourself, what can I do today, even if it's small, that will bring me closer to the person I want to be? That small, repeated action will be more powerful than any grand plan you never execute. Greatness isn't reserved for geniuses or the privileged. It's within reach of anyone who chooses to maintain their habits day after day. What will set you apart isn't your talent, but your consistency. The world is full of talented people who didn't go far because they couldn't persevere. And it's also full of stories of ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things simply because they refused to give up. You can be one of them if you choose to commit to the process, not the excuses. Never forget this: time will pass anyway. 5, 10, or 20 years will come. The question is, when they do, what story will your life tell? The story of someone who dreamed big but tried little, or the story of someone who, every day, even if silently, laid a brick in their own making? Your legacy won't be built on promises, but on repeated actions. On discipline in good times and bad. On perseverance even when no one else understands. Therefore, the final invitation is simple and powerful. Start today. Start even if you don't have all the answers, even if you lack absolute clarity, even if you feel unprepared. Because the truth is, no one is ever truly ready. Preparation is built along the way. Habits are formed through practice. Success is forged through daily repetition. Today you have the opportunity to begin something that, in a few years, will be an inseparable part of your identity and, perhaps, the greatest legacy you leave behind. Don't wait for magic signs or fleeting motivation. Your life is happening right now, and every decision you make is a seed. Plant the right ones, water them consistently, pull out excuses like weeds, and one day you'll look back and see a forest of results no one else imagined possible. That will be your legacy. Proof that you chose consistency over comfort, discipline over laziness, action over empty intentions. Today is the best day to start because it's the only day you have. And if you wake up tomorrow, let it be to continue, not to start all over again. Because true success never comes all at once. It's built, step by step, with the invisible repetition that one day becomes unstoppable. So, if this audiobook inspired you and you're ready to delve deeper into your personal growth and inner transformation, I invite you to discover another eye-opening audiobook that will change the way you see the world, your decisions, and your potential. Click here and I'll see you there.